That is very delicious. Welcome to Project Foodie. My name is Daniel Holzman. I'm the chef and owner of the Meatball Shop restaurants in New York City. And you are here in my home kitchen in Brooklyn, New York, where we are about to cook Lebanese lentil soup. This recipe has 3 simple steps. It should take somewhere around 45 minutes. So when we test the recipes for Project Foodie, we want to make sure they're perfect. So throughout the week before cooking, I cook everything for dinner. I made the lentil soup. A pound worth of lentils seemed reasonable to me, but it turned into a cauldron worth of soup. I'm talking a gallon of soup, and wasn't really sure what I was supposed to do with all of this soup, except it was so delicious that I ate every single bit of it. Literally, lunch and dinner for 5 days straight, all I ate was lentil soup. It was amazing. First and foremost, I want to gather all of our ingredients and have everything sensibly laid out. In a restaurant, we call this mise en place. It means having everything ready at a hand's reach for when you need it. Step 1, we want to get our lentils on to cook and cut our vegetables. First and foremost, we want to get our lentils on to cook. They are going to take the longest. So if you've watched any episodes before, you know that I don't often measure many ingredients. I do it by eye. In this case, lentils tend to soak up a lot of liquid and they expand. So I'm going to measure these and follow the recipe fairly exactly. Whenever I work with beans or lentils, I like to make sure that there are no stones in them. And so we're going to rinse them because they can be a little bit dusty, but we're also just going to pour them. So you notice I was kind of watching while I poured them into the measuring cup. I'm going to watch them as I pour them into the strainer and just make sure that they're actually all lentils and no stones. I find that Goya brand is really reliable. There are very infrequently any stones in there, maybe almost never. Some of the other brands of lentils, you actually do find stones, and you might want to sort them a little bit more carefully. There's nothing worse than biting into a stone and breaking your tooth in the middle of dinner. So these are really easy. I'm literally just rinsing them, and I've got our strainer here. We can leave our bowl over here for later. And then we're going to put our lentils. We're going to dump some lentils in the sink. We're going to put our lentils into our cooking pot, and we're going to cover them with the water. And, you know, you don't have to be absolutely perfect about this, but again, if you don't put enough water, the lentils will absorb all of it, and there won't be any room left. Throughout this process, depending upon the type of lentil you use or how dry they are, or vegetables are fickle and different, you might need to add a little bit more water. When I made it the first time, I had to add some more water. So just over a medium-high flame, we're going to get those lentils going. From the time the lentils start cooking, it should take about 30 or 35 minutes. So we want to get that going as quickly as possible. And now our lentils are going, we're going to prep our veggies. So the second longest thing that we need to cook here is a potato. Now, first thing I'm going to do is scrub it, because the potatoes often have a little bit of sand in those nooks and crannies, and we don't want sandy soup. I happen to have a potato scrubber handy, because I always do, sitting over my sink. But the reality is that you can just kind of use your hands or a sponge. But if you happen to have a professional Japanese potato scrubber, like I do, you're welcome to use that. So we've got our potato, which is scrubbed any sand out of the eyes or the nooks, and we're going to dice these guys. Now, the thing is that the lentils take longer than the potatoes to cook. However, I like the potatoes to be really soft and falling apart. They help to thicken the soup, but they also kind of like, I don't know, they leach out their flavor in an interesting way. So the potatoes, I want to get them in early so they cut. We're just going to dice these potatoes, so basically I cut off the ends to give myself a flat section to work with, so I'm not working with a round vegetable that's kind of sloppy and all over the place. Slice it into a few slices, and then again, just dice down. I'm not overly careful about making them perfectly the same size, because ultimately they're all going to fall apart and turn into mush, because we're making a lentil kind of like soupy stew. But I do cut them into pieces. How'd I do? All right, these guys are going to go right in with the lentils and come up at the same time, so we can just dump these right in. And that is really the only time sensitive, so you notice I was like in a little bit of a hurry there. That's the time sensitive situation, is that getting the lentils and the potatoes cooking, because they take a long time to cook, as early as possible. Now I can kind of slow down, give them a stir, and I'm going to wait for these to just come up to a boil over that kind of high heat, at which point we're going to lower them down. The other vegetables we're going to prep here are going to be our onion, which we're going to dice. So we're going to take the there's a bolster end and a stem end. We're just going to barely trim off the bolster end, leaving the bolster that holds the onion together intact. We're going to slice a little bit more out of the kind of stem end, exposing the flesh. Putting it flesh side down, we're going to cut our onion directly in half, and then we're going to peel out any of the outer leaves. And remember that this is a great example. You see this? It kind of looks like it's been peeled because it's not yellow, but if you were to really carefully look at that, you could see that this is a developing skin. It's drying out that second layer, and that will never ever cook, and it'll be really tough. So I want to make sure that any of that tough skin comes off of our onion before we start to make that soup. It looks to me like this onion has a little bit of frostbite here, so I'm going to get rid of that layer. There's a little bit extra. I don't throw out a whole onion because there's a little bruise. We just take our knife and we can just kind of trim it off. So don't fret if your onions aren't perfect. Neither are you. Here's the deal. So to dice our onion, we're literally just going to cut straight through. Notice my knife does not reach all the way to the end here, so that even though I cut through the whole onion to the bottom, the onion stays together because the bolster is holding it in place. So we cut through at the desired dice size. I always count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That way I know I'm making them the same size. If I get to 9 cuts, it means you cut too thin. Once horizontally, is there a word for that? And then we're going to go straight down just to give ourselves dice. Again, we're making soup. I don't have to be overly careful about making it absolutely perfect. These onions, however, are going to get cooked until kind of almost burnt. And so if I do have any like little tiny pieces, they might get burnt. The nice part about this soup is that the kind of extra caramelized, burnt flavor of the sugar in the onions is going to actually add a really interesting nuance, so I'm not worried. There's this little core, which you can kind of see here, which holds the whole onion together. We're going to discard those 2 pieces. And we can put our onions to the side. To prepare our garlic, we're literally just going to take a couple of cloves. We're going to use the side of our knife, and carefully so that we don't cut ourselves, we're just going to give it a little pound. And that will have 2 effects. One, it's going to loosen the skin, making it super easy to peel. Peeling garlic does not have to be a chore if you happen to have all the tips and tricks from the Project Foodie app, or you just pound on them. And then the other thing it does is that it kind of starts the chopping process. You can see it's broken up, so I'll just trim off the very end and then give the actual garlic cloves a little chop into smaller pieces. Maybe once over again. We can separate those to the side. Woof! We are tearing it up here at Project Foodie. Off to the races, making lentil soup. Ladies and gentlemen, start your engines, check your lentils, give it a stir, and then let's peel the Swiss chard. So, here's the deal with Swiss chard. The stem, it really actually funny. We prize the leaves in Swiss chard. And I was reading this old French cookbook because I think the flavor of the stems is really interesting. It's got this like interesting metallic, delicious flavor that you don't really get anywhere else. And I was reading this old French cookbook, and it was talking about how normally you discard the leaves and use the stems. And I was like, that's so crazy. Is that a misprint? And the answer is no. Apparently now we throw away the stems and use the leaves. And back in the day, you used to throw away the leaves and use the stems. Just goes to show you that, like, both the stems and leaves are good. Whatever your perspective. The way I'm going to peel the Swiss chard is I'm going to take 2 fingers and I'm going to pinch the leaves without pinching the stem. And then I'm just literally going to peel down. And you can see that the stem pulls out and the leaf pulls out. Really, really easy. and you wind up with a stemless leaf and a leafless stem. So again, I'm going to just literally take the stem in my left hand. If I'm a righty, I'm going to pinch the leaf and the stem together between my right hand, my thumb and my forefinger. You knew that we were born with opposable thumbs, and that makes us different than apes? No, that makes apes different than other primates. That makes us primates. And I'm just going to peel the stem and the leaf away so that I get a leaf with no stem, and I get a stem with a tiny bit of leaf, which I'm going to pluck off. So we definitely want to do that because the leaves and the stems are going to cook for different amounts of time. So by separating them, again, if I get a little leaf and a little stem mixed up, it's okay. You know, we're just making soup here. I'm sure the Lebanese grandmas aren't like painstakingly separating. They're just like doing what I do normally, separating. So I can separate these guys. I'm noticing that this stem, it's a little this one's a little wonky. It's kind of a little wonky. It's a little rotten. Normally I'd say like, oh, I can trim most of those parts out, but the whole thing is not so nice. So maybe we'll just discard this one. There's no reason to use that particular stem. And then for these leaves that I've made this nice pile out of, we can just kind of stack them, and we can cut them into bite-sized pieces so that no one's like eating their soup and is making spaghetti leaves out of giant pieces of Swiss chard. You know what I'm saying? Cut it once, give it a turn, and we're just going to dice it into bite-sized pieces. Our stems, however, they're going to take a long time to cook, and they're really tough. So we're going to cut them a lot smaller. What we're going to do is we're actually just going to start kind of at the thin end, and we're going to slice them fairly thinly into little pieces. A big piece of stem can be quite fibrous, and you can imagine that the fibers are running in this direction. So by slicing it thinly across the grain, we're making them way more tender. So just slice them into kind of thin slices. And when this soup is going to be done, these are going to really melt and fall apart. So you're really not going to be able to distinguish between onions or Swiss chard. So again, I'm not being overly careful about making it perfect. I'm just cutting it kind of, simply at the right size. So there's a subtle difference between the green and the yellow, and generally speaking, like in carrots, you see a lot of orange carrots versus some of the red carrots, which we don't see as often. Generally speaking, the ones we see the most of are either A, the most delicious, or B, the most shelf stable, travel stable, so they've been developed as the varietal of that vegetable that has been brought to market because it has a quality that works for commercialization. In the case of Swiss chard, I find that the yellow one has a little bit more of a metallic flavor, the green one is a little bit more sweet, and the red is somewhere in between, but they're pretty much interchangeable. When I'm just choosing one, I usually choose green chard. It's usually a little less expensive, and for me, it's the sweetest. Also, after you cook it, they kind of all look the same. So we've got our lentils cooking. They've just come up to a boil. We have our veggies prepped and ready to go, and that is the end of step 1. Step 2, we're going to hard boil our eggs, and we're going to cook our vegetables. So for step 2, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to hard boil our egg. So in order to hard boil eggs, we all know that we put them in water, we bring it up to a boil together, because if you drop the eggs into the boiling water, the eggs can crack, and it's a really bit of an issue, unless you happen to have a beautiful, gentle lentil base to drop the eggs into. So because I'm cooking these in the boiling water with the lentils, I'm just going to drop them in. I already have some boiling water going. So I've got a couple of eggs in the fridge, and I like a hard-boiled egg that's just slightly soft in the center. That takes from the fridge into boiling water exactly 7 minutes. So I'm going to set my timer. I'm going to drop our eggs into our lentils, making sure that they're completely submerged. In 7 minutes, I'm going to pull them out, and I'm going to rinse them under cool water. And that's all it takes to hard boil our eggs. So here's the deal with this lentil soup. It's really simple. There are very few ingredients. We've got sweetness from the onions and the chard. You've got the savory lentils, and then you've got the lemon, which is going to bring a lot of lightness and acidity. It balances out really, really well. The spices are going to give it like that distinct Middle Eastern flavor that I love so much. And what we're going to learn how to do right now is how to dry toast spices. So I start with a pan, no oil or anything, and we're going to put our spices in there. So we've got some cumin seed, and we have some coriander seed that have been ground. I freshly ground these right before we started. Very, very easy to do. Basically, we're just going to heat up the pan with the spices in there while we gently shake it around over a medium-high heat. What we don't want to do is burn the spices, so I'm just going to kind of carefully watch them, and as the pan heats up, these spices are going to toast and they're going to release their flavors. There's actually oil in there. There's a lot of oil that are in those dried spices, and that's going to start kind of fry the spices from the inside. So dry toasting spices is a really great way to release flavors. Like when I make chili, it has this really delicious, like fragrant, spicy flavor that doesn't happen if you don't toast the spices first. It's just like an essential step. So we've got these spices, and I'm kind of, as our pan heats up, I can really start to smell it immediately. And if you're doing, you notice I didn't put anything hot, nothing spicy in here. If you're dry toasting chilies, I mean, you got to keep the windows open. You will be burning out the house, like coughing and sputtering from rooms over. Your neighbors are calling the doctor, ambulance, calling the hospital, calling the fire department, calling the cops, calling the landlord. So I'm usually do not like to put anything spicy in at that point. I can notice the color change subtly. If you notice that it's brown, it's done. If you notice that it's black, you're done. Do not burn the spices and then continue. Stop, throw it out, and start again. If you burn your spices, that flavor is going to stay forever, and it's going to ruin your soup. So we're just going to toast these until they kind of come to that dark brown, and I can smell them. At which point we're going to add our oil. And the oil is an ingredient. I put a lot of oil in there, and we're going to add our onions. Now, the cool oil and the cool onions are going to cool down the hot pan, and they are going to arrest. No, the spices are not going to jail, people. Arrest is another word for stop. They're going to stop the spices from continuing to toast and burn. So we're just going to give those a little toss or stir with our spoon. And we're going to cook these onions. Now, I want all my onions. Now, when we cook onions and we want to caramelize them, when we talk about caramelize, we're talking about caramelizing. We're literally taking the sugar in the onions and we're turning it into caramel. We are burning it subtly. If we want to caramelize our onions, we never add salt because salt is a diuretic. No, it's not going to make you skinny. It literally means it draws the moisture out of something. So we basically add salt to our onions, it draws the moisture out, and the onions sweat or cook slowly, stew in their own juices. If you don't add any salt, the onions retain their moisture and they brown more easily. So if I want to saute and get color on my onions, I'm going to cook them with no salt, just like this, over a high flame, bring the flame up to high, and we're going to literally cook these until they start to like border on burnt. So this is probably a 10-minute process, just cooking these onions. The reality is that there's not much to do right now, but you got time to lean, you got time to clean, people. Use that elbow grease, put it to work. We're going to clean up a little bit because we got a couple minutes while our onions are cooking. And you know what they say about a watch pot? It's already boiling. So our eggs have been cooking for 7 minutes. I'm going to scoop them out just using our handy dandy tasting spoon. And in a bowl with ice cold water, New York City tap water runs at 41 degrees. We're just going to fish our eggs out, and we're going to drop them right in the water gently so they don't break. Whew. Hot potatoes. Literally, hot potatoes in here. And we're going to sit these over here and let them cool. And I do want to periodically stir our onions because that looks really great though, huh? You know what? I've been to the Middle East. I've been to Egypt. I've been to the United Arab Emirates. I've been to Kuwait, and I've been to Dubai, but I've never been to Lebanon. Lebanon and Syria, where they're really famed for having some of the best food in the world, and I'm a little bit sad about that. I actually developed this recipe from one of my favorite cookbooks, Arabesque, which is one of Claudia Rodin's cookbooks. She's one of the best cookbook authors out there, and all of her cookbooks are amazing, and this recipe is really, really delicious. So if your onions are freaking out on you and they're already starting to burn, you can add the rest of your vegetables, or you can lower your flame at this point, or you can add a little bit of water. Mine need a little bit longer here. I've got a kind of heavy bottom saute pan. Ultimately though, the next step is we're going to add our Swiss chard stems, and we're going to add our garlic and cook it for another minute. So bear with me. I really want these to, you can start to see that they're starting to caramelize a little bit, like the edges, but we really want to give them time. And this is one of the main factors. So this soup is going to cook for another 15 to 20 minutes. However, we don't have a lot to do. And we're always in a rush to get everything in the soup pot and get done, because that feels like we've accomplished something. But the reality is that building the flavor by cooking the onions slowly in the oil, allowing them to burn slightly, stirring them, is a really essential part to making this soup absolutely delicious. Again, really, really simple. Make sure you have great ingredients, and then treat them carefully. That's exactly what I'm looking for. You start to see that at some point the water in the onions is kind of cooked out. They're really starting to caramelize perfectly. The spices are trying to crisp up, little tiny burnt pieces in here. And right about now, let me give them another 1 minute. Another 1 minute. The lentils a little stir. You can taste our lentils and you'll see that some of them are starting to fall apart, but some of these pieces are still completely whole. Raw lentils give you gas. You want to cook your lentils completely. Legumes in general, cooked all the way through, unless you want to be talking out of the wrong hole. Listen, no one likes a shit talker, people. Get it? All right. So you can see our onions. This is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about really beautifully caramelized. When I start to see each and every single piece dehydrated, little bit, tiny bit burnt on the outside, little few black pieces, and that's when my onions are where I want them to be, and that's the flavor that's going to really give a distinct sweetness to the soup. So at this point, we can add our salt. We can add our garlic. And we want to toast our garlic for about 1 minute, Garlic never really cooks properly in liquid, so you do want to dry cook it in this oil, but burnt garlic has a really kind of negative flavor, really nasty, distinct flavor. So we do want to toast our garlic in with the oil and the onions, and then right as it starts to brown, and it's a hot pan, so it's about 1 minute when our garlic is going to start to be brown, we're going to add our Swiss chard stems. They're big enough and they have enough moisture, there's enough of them, they're cold enough and they have enough moisture that they're going to cool down the pan and slow down the cooking process. So our garlic has been in for about a minute. I can smell the toasting garlic in the air. We're going to add our Swiss chard in to our pan. You can hear it start to sputter because there's a lot of, again, water or moisture in that Swiss chard, which is cooling it down. And it's almost burnt. It's right on the verge here that we can just turn off our flame, and we're going to put all these vegetables in to our lentil soup. So I'm going to take these guys and move our lentil soup front and forward. Again, lowering it down to kind of a medium, low flame. We can just stir our veggies and drop them right in. Now, these vegetables and the lentils are going to cook for about 15 minutes together. If you notice, you got some spices left over here, and you're like, well, I want to make sure that I get all that frond, all the caramelized sugars out of there. No problem. I can dump some of the water from our soup right into the pan, give it a little mix around, and then that's going to get dumped right back in. So now we've got our lentils, our potatoes, our garlic, our spices, our onions, and our Swiss chard stems in our pot. This is the time that we want to take a look at it. And we want to decide, do I need to add a little bit more water? And if it's a little bit thick like this guy here, where really the lentils are at the very top and they're bubbling over, I really do need kind of an inch of water because I'm going to add all that Swiss chard. It's going to continue to cook. So for me at this point, I'm going to add another cup and a half of water. If yours is a little bit more liquidy, I can really see it's quite thick and dry in here. If yours is a little soupier, you're not going to need to add any more water. If it looks like that, add a little bit more water. So we have our lentil soup with all the vegetables in there cooking, and that is the end of step 2. So for step 3, we're going to add our Swiss chard and our lemon to the soup. We're going to peel and cut our eggs. We're going to get our yogurt. We're going to plate, garnish, and serve. So our soup has just been cooking with all of our vegetables for a minute or two. Again, those Swiss chard stems really only had a couple of minutes of head start, but that will be enough. We want the leaves to really be falling apart, but we don't want them to be completely disintegrated in mush. At this point, we can add those guys into our soup. Give them a little stir in there. We're going to add our lemon juice. So I've got this nifty lemon squeezer. Here's the deal. Because this is a lime reamer or a lime squeezer, not a lemon squeezer, it's a little bit too small to fit a lemon in, which is bigger than a lime. So I'm just going to cut it into quarters. There are lemon squeezers that look exactly the same. They came out on the market fairly recently. The reality is that I don't want to have two different tools, so I'm just going to cut this lemon into 4 pieces. And I'm going to put quarters in. The interesting thing about the way to use a lime or a lemon squeezer is you put the lemon in upside down. It's counterintuitive. It looks like it should fit in like that, but the truth is you want to put it in upside down. That's going to squeeze the juice through the holes. It's going to turn it inside out, which actually like breaks the oils out of the skin, and you get this really strong flavor out of it. So it's actually even better. So I'm going to just squeeze our lemon juice right in, and you can see actually you wind up with so much juice out of a lemon when you use one of these squeezers. And I squeeze it completely together. And then I'm just going to toss those guys. And this lemon juice is a really important component. For a soup like this, I would probably have a second lemon sitting around because you might want to add a little bit more lemon at the end, because it's really, the acidity helps to bring out the sweetness of the onions and the lentils. So I've squeezed about 3/4 of my lemon in there. I'm going to reserve 1/4 to just brighten it up at the very end. Can give our soup a stir. And this is now going to cook for another 12 or so minutes, at which point the potatoes, all the vegetables are going to be completely stewed down. And then we're going to taste it. We're going to re-season it. We're going to add a little bit more salt and decide, you know, where we're at. We can add the turmeric at this point. I add the turmeric a little bit later on. It's got, I don't know, a little bit more of a subtle flavor that tends to kind of dissipate, so maybe don't need to cook it for quite as long with the turmeric. The turmeric is going to stain everything a beautiful kind of yellow and bring a gorgeous hue to our otherwise deliciously brunette soup. So, our soup is just stewing now over a medium flame. I don't know if you have one of these things. If you don't have a little spoon rest on your stove, there's nothing that drives me more crazy than when someone's stirring with a spoon and then sticks their spoon right on their stove. It's very, very dirty. It bakes on. It's hard to clean. Everybody should have a spoon rest. I happen to get mine in a fancy place. I'm not going to tell you where because they're not for sale. Okay, so next step here is we're going to peel our eggs. Now, it might seem that peeling eggs is below everybody. However, I have a trick to making perfectly peeled eggs that's really, really easy. And the way I do it is I peel them under cold running water. The first thing that I do is I crack the egg literally all over. So I crack all over. I don't just make one crack. I crack it until the entire shell is completely smashed. And then under cold running water, which gets rid of the shells, I literally peel the entire egg, and it's very easy. And also, because the egg is cracked, the whole thing just falls right off. So peel it, and under the cold running water, I make sure that there are no shells left on. So literally just going to peel our egg by cracking it all over, and then under cold running water, we can literally just drive all the peel off. I don't like my eggs really, really hard cooked. So if you like your eggs completely solid in the center, it needs 8 minutes. 7 minutes, they still have a tiny bit of, just a whisper of soft yellow in the center. So we can clean these up. I've tell from a little birdie that putting eggs down your drain is good for your plumbing. I've also heard tell that putting eggs down your drain is terrible for your plumbing. I'm going to split the difference and put half the eggs down the drain. I'm going to throw the other half away because one thing I do know is that eggshells are great for compost. Our soup has been cooking for just about the allotted time. And this is when I do not want to just be like blindly reading a recipe and saying, now I'm serving my soup. I want to taste it. I want to make sure that the potatoes, you can see, I have a whole chunk of potato here. So, is it fully cooked? Give it a little smash and look, it just breaks right apart. It's fully cooked, right? We can give it a stir and give it a taste. I'm going to make sure I get one of those Swiss chard stem pieces and just really hot, give it a cool. There's a tiny bit of texture. I'm not just eating mush. You don't want to serve gruel, but we definitely do not want it to be crunchy. We want it to be falling apart in our mouth. Distinctly being able to tell which vegetables are which, but definitely everything is fully cooked. So our soup is really, at this point, fully cooked. Maybe one last taste, I can say, does it need anything else? This soup should pop. I mean, it should be like, boom, that soup is amazing. And the way to make it pop is to just make sure that it has a little squeeze of lemon, a little extra salt, right at the end stirred in, and that's gonna turn off the flame, and our soup has got all the freshness that we're looking for. I don't know if you watch any reality television shows about cooking competitions, but they always lose at the very end because they didn't taste their food. Before you serve it, if this sits here for 2 minutes, I'm going to taste it again before I serve it and reseason it. Something like lentils, it's constantly absorbing more moisture. The potatoes are absorbing salt, and the seasoning changes over time. If I reheat this tomorrow, I reseason it. Actually, I learned that the hard way. Every time I've ever been on a competition reality show about cooking, I've lost because I underseason things. That's the truth. I didn't taste it at the end. We forget. Do not be Daniel Holzman. Do not forget. Keep on tasting. In the case of this, it's a pleasure to taste. It's like Beirut in a bowl. Is that in Lebanon? Is Beirut in Lebanon? Anybody? No? Yeah. I saw a TV show about that. All right, so our lentil soup is completely ready. All we have to do is plate, garnish, and serve. So we have our hard cooked egg, which we're just going to slice directly in half. Now, if we want to slice through and you don't feel confident with this, you can use a thin, small knife, but basically you don't want to saw it, which will break it apart. You're just going to cut straight down with the thinnest part of the knife, which is the very tip. Literally just going to cut straight down. And you can see that our yolk, for me, that is absolutely perfectly hard-cooked egg, where it's just slightly darker yellow in the center, means it's completely not overcooked. I mean, that is absolutely perfect, right? Our soup can go right into our bowl. In the absence of a ladle, our cup measure works perfectly. Now, we can drop this guy right in the bowl, and you can see all of the veggies. I mean, this is a thick, stewy soup, hearty. It's amazing for a kind of cold winter night. However, this soup actually tastes really great at room temperature if you want to eat it during the summer. So in the summer months, I would eat it at room temperature, and in the winter, I'm going to eat it stewing hot. We have our plain whole milk natural yogurt, which is one of my favorite ingredients in the entire world. It's actually childproof. Possible to open. There's often a crust on our yogurt, so we can give it a little stir and make sure that, you know, we're getting the best of the best here. And then I'm going to put a nice big dollop of yogurt right over the top. That is very delicious. Our eggs 1 and 2. And then finally, our really spicy, so be careful, cayenne. If you want the color but you don't want the spice, paprika is a great substitute here, right over the top. And that is our Lebanese potato, lentil, and Swiss chard soup with hard-cooked eggs and whole milk yogurt. One of the most soul-satisfying soups that you could ever eat. There are a lot of lentil soups out there. You should absolutely try this one. It is so easy, so inexpensive, so filling, so hearty, and so delicious. You could feed an entire family for 10 bucks with this soup. Be sure to like and subscribe, check us on Instagram, and download the Project Foodie app on the iOS App Store. I hope you've enjoyed this Project Foodie cook-along, and I hope you'll join us for more. If you want to make delicious Lebanese lentil soup, you are going to need the following ingredients. We have lentils. Here's the deal with lentils. There are lots of different varieties of lentils out there, and many will work for this recipe. However, if you are making green lentils, which is very traditional and what I prefer, I love the flavor of green lentils, there are a couple of different types. One of them is a little more expensive. They're smaller and they're darker green. And they're great for lentil salad because they really don't break apart. They take a little bit longer to cook. They're not great for this recipe. I like to use these larger, light green lentils. They cook faster and they fall apart, which is going to help to thicken the soup. The smaller lentils will work, so no problem. They just don't break apart and make it kind of, we're looking for like almost like a stewy lentil mush more than a soup consistency. We have kosher salt, we have a couple of eggs, a lemon, some Swiss chard. Swiss chard comes in like rainbow chard or green chard or red chard. Any Swiss chard will work. This is called rainbow chard because it has a mix of all the different colors. Really, almost any leafy green will work. So you can do it with kale or mustard greens or whatever you happen to have. We have whole milk plain yogurt. You can use skim milk yogurt. I happen to love whole milk yogurt. You definitely want to have a natural plain yogurt. Do not use anything flavored for this because it can kind of clash. A yellow or Spanish onion. I use a yellow or Spanish onion. It's pretty sweet. It's going to add some sweetness to this dish. Some garlic. I have a Yukon Gold or a yellow wax potato, they call them. A lot of people make this dish with rice and lentils, and that works really, really well. I just happen to love the flavor of potatoes and lentils together, and it is traditional to make it with a potato. We have a light, kind of neutrally flavored extra virgin olive oil. I would not use a really expensive finishing oil because A, it would be wasted, we're going to cook with it, and B, the really expensive olive oils tend to impart a really bitter flavor that we don't need. And then we have some freshly milled spices, and I mean freshly milled because I keep all of my spices whole, and then I grind them when I need them. I've got a little tiny hand grinder. It's really easy, keeps your spices fresher and ensures you have the freshest. I mean, you can smell them. They're very, very vibrant and fragrant. I have some coriander seed. We have some cumin seed. We have some turmeric, and we have some cayenne pepper. Cayenne pepper is very spicy, so use it sparingly. If you want to make delicious Lebanese lentil soup with hard-cooked egg and yogurt, you are going to need the following tools. We have a medium bowl, a metal strainer, a pot that is appropriately sized for the amount of lentil soup you are going to make. Be advised, people, that lentils expand like hotcakes. I don't know if hotcakes really expand, but lentils definitely do. So you're going to need a way bigger pot than you think you're going to need. If you undersized your pot and you're like cooking your lentils and they're starting to grow, that's fine. Transfer it into a bigger pot. No worries. We have a large sauté pan where we're going to toast some spices and we're going to sauté some onions. A knife and cutting board, a tasting spoon because this dish is very tasty and you're going to want to eat it throughout to see if your lentils are fully cooked. Measuring cups and measuring spoons, a wooden stirring utensil. I love this flat-bottomed utensil that helps to stir and scrape the bottom of the pan to make sure nothing's sticking. And then I have a lemon reamer. This is Heco in Mexico, which means made in Mexico, lime squeezer, actually, because that's what I happen to have, and it works really well for limes or lemons. I love it because it gets all the juice out of the lemons, and it strains out the seeds simultaneously. The only problem is it's a little bit small, so you kind of got to cut the lemons extra. If you do not have a specialty lemon squeezing device, you can use your hand. God's lemon squeezer. 5-finger discount. It's free, people. Squeeze away. You can use your left hand if you happen to have 2 of them to strain out the seeds.